Welcome to Maritime Connection. I'm David Burke, sitting in for Preston Mulligan. Today on the show, how do you cope with grief? Thanks for joining us. Our toll-free number is 1-800-565-1940. 2021 has been a hard year for many of us. People have seen their loved ones die from things like COVID and cancer, and there have been widespread tragedies in the Maritimes and across the country. Earlier this month in Nova Scotia, a family of 6 died in a camper fire. It happened in Millvale, a community near the Nova Scotia-New Brunswick border. Last week, hundreds of friends, family, and strangers gathered outside at Victoria Square in Amherst to remember the Sears-Robertson family. On a national level, many Canadians are trying to come to grips with the hard evidence that thousands of Indigenous children died at residential schools. It's a truth that many First Nations have known for years, but uncovering these children's bodies can bring that grief back to the surface. Our question today is, how do you cope with grief? How do you keep going after the loss of a loved one? What do you do to make sure you take care of yourself? How do you help your loved ones cope? Do you have any advice to share? We want to hear from you. Give us a call right now at 1-800-565-1940 and tell us what you think. You can send me your thoughts or questions or comments on Twitter. I'm at David Burke, CBC. You can email us. The address is maritimeconnection@cbc.ca, and the toll-free number for you to call again is 1-800-565-1940. We have 2 guests with us today. Simon Sherry is a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Dalhousie University and is a practicing clinical psychologist. Good day, Simon.
Good afternoon, David.
And we've got Roy Ellis. He's a therapist and author. Hello, Roy.
Hi, David. Good to be here today.
Thanks for joining us. Simon, I want to come back to you. Is there a right or a wrong way to grieve?
There is no particular sequence required. There is no one path to travel. Everyone should be able to follow or take their own course when it comes to grief and to loss. There isn't a particular timeline to follow either. I think we should let people deal with grief, loss, and trauma in their own way.
Do you find, Simon, like many families, my family has had its share of losses as well, and there are always some members in my family that are always like, the time for that is past now. It's time to sort of move on and get over it. Is that an attitude that other people run into in terms of family members after the loss of somebody they love?
I identify with what you're saying as a clinical psychologist, because when I used to work in hospitals, I would sometimes get a referral where the patient wasn't behaving according to the expectations of those around them in terms of grief. I'll return to that idea that there is no one timeline to follow or a particular sequence of events people need to go through. At the same time, there is a complicated question embedded in what you asked, and that is, at what point would we expect most forms of grief to have resolved, and what are some red flags for grief becoming more complicated? And I do think duration is one consideration. So is how distressed a person is or upset by it. Other points to ponder: is there a subjective sense that the person is stuck? We know that most people recover from grief quite readily. It's a universal experience, but it may be about 10% of people 6 to 12 months out will report still feeling mired in their grief and greatly distressed by it.
And so is there, I guess this goes to another question, is how do we define grief as compared to other emotions? Because grief is kind of a big term. Is grief different from general sadness that someone feels at the loss of someone they love, or how do we draw a distinction there?
I think we can conceptually and empirically try and disentangle grief from something like sadness or depression. With grief, there's often a yearning for the deceased person and a sense of emptiness and loss in the absence of that loved one. In contrast, for depression, there's just depressed, flat, low mood, and really the absence of any sort of pleasure or happiness. When it comes to grief, you'll still get bursts of positive emotion or humor when you're talking to someone about the loss of their loved one. Grief also can come in waves. You'll talk about pangs of grief or episodes of grief, whereas depression or sadness tends to be more persistent and just flat. And another point of differentiation might be, for grief, people can generally feel good about themselves, although they might have some guilt specific to the loss of a loved one. But when you're depressed, there's often a general or a universal feeling of low self-esteem or even worthlessness. So it does seem possible to disentangle grief from the experience of sadness or depression.
I want to move over to Roy there for a bit. Roy, what do you hear when people come to talk to you about grief? What can you tell us a bit about what they describe as their sort of emotional state when they come to see you?
Well, I think the ones who come that are in the most trouble want out as quickly as possible. They're experiencing sensations in their body, thoughts in their mind, and different kinds of relational experiences of perhaps withdrawal or isolation or anxiety, and they want out. They're looking for a path to escape those feelings, and they're hoping that I'll have some sort of coping mechanisms that will help them exit stage left.
And it sounds like these people are looking for sort of like a quick fix. It doesn't sound like that exists, eh?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, as Simon so eloquently put it, there is no timeline, and every grief is unique as a thumbprint. And yet some people seem to resolve quite quickly, sometimes within weeks or months, and others it can be years that are still having normal grief. What I will say, I think, is the grief is a practice. When I talk to people about how to move in grief, it's more of an experience that we engage in, almost like a relationship, and it's very relational in a way. So I encourage people to think about grief not as a sort of something, a trial that they need to pass through, but rather as a way of experiencing self and the body and relationship with others and the deceased, in a way of trying to, in a way, as the Thomas Addig said, to relearn the world and to relearn themselves.
Do you think that people, in this day and age, we're so used to being able to stimulate and entertain ourselves sort of at the drop of a hat. Do you think that people want to be able to make themselves feel better faster because they have access, in other parts of their life, they can, turn on to something else and sort of distract themselves from it? Does that play a role in any of this?
Well, absolutely. In a very sort of topical way, it does, David. At a deeper level, and we talk about being a death-averse culture, a society that doesn't like to want to talk about death. But I actually think that's a bit of a misnomer. I think we're actually a feeling avoidant culture, and some of the feelings that we really want to avoid are sadness, sorrow, lamentation, separation distress, a feeling of loss and lostness. And those are some of the primary feelings of grief, as well as confusion, fear, anxiety, identity challenges as well. So for me, those distractions like, movies, entertainment, status seeking, spending, alcohol, sex, you name it, these things are all ways of avoiding the deep pains that accompany grief. And I think that is exactly why people seek quick fixes.
Is there any sort of consequence to that, to avoiding those sort of deep feelings?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, we see this again and again. I think you could say that in one sense, all addictive processes are escapes from emotions, and emotions, by the way, are connected to our relationships. We're not emotional about things typically that aren't connected to some kind of a relationship that we have with somebody. So if we don't engage our grief and our losses, and losses of any sort with people, whether it's a small infraction or rupture in a relationship, somebody saying the wrong word or not honoring something that we've done, or something as large as a loss or betrayal by the system, as we see a lot of in cancer. If we don't sort of meet these relational moments and these emotional moments with open hearts and a willingness to sort of stand and be uncomfortable and to share openly about what's going on inside of us, I think we open ourselves up to more numbing behaviors, more relational challenges, more, and also, as well as Gabor Mate has pointed out in his book, When the Body Says No, more somatic and bodily discomfort than illnesses and diseases.
All right, we've got our first caller on the line. We've got Tanya calling us from Halifax. Good day, Tanya.
Good day.
So how do you cope with grief?
Well, today I'm talking specifically about my grandmother, and I want to apologize if I am sounding too emotional, because I really loved her, and the way that I connect with her is by playing her piano.
And so was playing piano something you did with your grandmother? Did she teach you, or was it just something?
I have her piano, and it was in her house, and I have it now with me, and my personal belief is I can connect with her through the piano by playing music. And it just helps me to think of her and remember her forever, because she was so wonderful to me. So it's just a very helpful thing personally for me, because I'll never forget her for as long as I'm alive.
And Tanya, how often do you take the time out to play the piano?
Oh, a lot. Yeah, a lot. And it's just very helpful for me to express myself through music. It's been very, very helpful to me. It's a combination of recognizing her and playing music. So it's something I do personally that is very helpful.
So it's not just something you do like as sort of like a stress relief or something like that. It's just sort of a general part of your life, sort of good time, bad time, whenever, just to get that connection, hey?
Yes, with my grandmother.
And how long has it been since your grandmother passed?
Oh, many, many, many years ago now.
Were you able to play the piano soon after she passed? Or, because I know, once again, from my own family, there were some things that my sister, for example, enjoyed doing with our grandparents, but within a couple of years after they passed, she couldn't really, she knitted with my grandmother a lot, and for the first couple of years, she couldn't go back to knitting. She had it's like she had to warm back up to it. Did something similar happen to you with the piano, or was that, were you able to get back right at it?
No, I actually kept the piano with me the whole time. I moved the piano with me every time that I moved, so that I could, continue to play.
Well, that's very lovely.
So, okay. Well, and thank you very much for taking my call. It's a way that I feel a connection with her to this day, and she was really nice to me, and thank you.
You're very welcome. And Tanya, I wanted to ask you before you left, is there any particular song that you find yourself playing that really reminds you of your grandmother, or is it just sort of every sort of whatever tune you play?
It's the New Year's one, the New Year's one, where you think about the people that have passed before you and about what they did for you, and then you think about the future, and to never forget those who are gone.
And is that Old Lang Syne?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tanya, for giving us a call.
Well, thank you very, very much. Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye. That was Tanya calling from Halifax. This is Maritime Connection. I'm David Burke, filling in for Preston Mulligan. If you want to give us a call right now, we've got an open board. If you want to get on the air, we're at 1-800-565-1940. That's 1-800-565-1940. Today we're asking you, how do you cope with grief? If you're in the Halifax area, you can also call us at 420-9336. Simon, I wanted to come back to you. What did you think about what Tanya had to say about connecting with her grandmother through playing the piano?
I was moved by what she had to say, and I think it's also an important illustration of how attachment plays out in the process of grief. In the most obvious physical sense, when someone dies, you lose them, but you maintain a close emotional bond with them, and that bond is dynamic and ongoing. And in Tanya's case, even years later, she's quite appropriately, quite beautifully moved to tears when she thinks of her grandmother. And I think that's important for people struggling with grief to understand, that your relationship with the person you lost does continue on in important ways.
And Roy, what about yourself? Have you run into people doing similar things to what Tanya's doing to feel that connection with their loved ones? Roy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Do you find people do similar things to Tanya to feel connected to their loved ones?
Yes, and I think music is worthwhile just speaking of just briefly how powerful it is when people connect to a certain song, and even music itself is so calming in terms of our nervous system, and the way it connects us non-verbally at the level of body, if we're singing or playing or listening. It's such a beautiful sort of non-rational way of connecting, and I think it's one of the beautiful things, and what I loved about Tanya's instantaneous warmth that moved in her, and her tears and her emotions, was how that was connected to music and connected to something that perhaps transcends language.
Have you ever met somebody with something like similar to the piano? Do you have any other examples of people doing an activity that they used to do with a loved one who's passed on that they continue on?
I've got a great one for you. It's a funny story. There was this woman whose husband every Sunday afternoon went down to the basement, to the den, to the stinky old den, took a couple old Milwaukees down with him, turned on the TV and watched the Sunday afternoon football game, cranked up super loud while she upstairs, door closed, in the kitchen, kind of fuming and fretting about this. And this just went on for decades. And then he died. And sure enough, on Sunday afternoon, she found herself down in the rec room with an old Milwaukee sitting in front of, in that old chair of his, and watching the football game and feeling an incredible amount of connection to him. Now, I don't think she made this a habit for the rest of her life, but there was a period of time in her grief when connecting with what he loved made her feel close to him. And there was power, there's a healing power in that. And she laughed about it as being a switch in her went off, and something about him that she had always been annoyed by became sweet and full of a warm remembrance.
Oh, that's really sweet. We've got another caller on the line. We've got Leona, and good day, Leona.
Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm not too bad. I'm so happy you have this program on so I can get this out. I have, my family has been helping me with it and whatnot, but over time, I have had a lot of losses, and my family has had a lot of losses. And since before COVID, and even before that, things have been going missing in my house when I'm not there, and it is holding me back because I was able, over COVID, I was able to get back into making things that, like through knitting, crocheting, and sewing. In March, I finished a poncho for my granddaughter. and I've got the front part of the tank top. And I was able to do after that. But this, I know it's just very overwhelming that things are going missing, and that plays into my grief too, because there's such a thing as sudden loss that has taken hold of me, and I just wanted to get that out there.
And Leona, when you mentioned...
Very frustrating. The most recent thing that I've lost is my asthma discus, and I just renewed it after 2 days of losing the one previous to that.
So you're talking about you're losing physical things from your home, are you?
Yes.
And so are these things that you had a connection with, like from a loved one that has since
oh, yes.
passed away?
It doesn't matter. It could be a loved one. It could be a pet. As you probably know, it could be a pet or anything that along with that was another item recently. But again, they're menial things that's going missing, and it does play into my grief. Because I'm still grieving over a lot of things. My oldest sister passed away 2 years ago.
And so do you have any idea how these things are going missing from your home? Are they misplaced, or do you think someone's taking things?
When I'm out, I went out with my brother and his wife on Friday in the afternoon, and I went to use my asthma discus on Friday night, and I can't find it, and I've only had it for 2 days.
Okay. And Leona, I want to go back to something else that you mentioned. So you mentioned the crocheting and the knitting and sewing. Is that something you do to cope with grief?
Well, I basically love to do those things. I like to make things that catch my eye, and that sort of thing. And yeah, I believe if you like to do anything, that it's a remarkable help.
All right,
to cope with things.
Well, thank you so much.
I could have been so much further ahead by now. It just really makes me nervous to be in a place that this is happening, and so that's why.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your call, Leona. We've got some other callers on the line, and good luck with finding your missing things.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye. We've got Tara Stewart on the line from Lance, Nova Scotia. Good day, Tara. How do you cope with grief?
Well, it happened. My husband died suddenly of a heart attack 24 years ago. Our son was 13, and besides missing him terribly, we were very, very close. I hate this word closure. Oh, as soon as you have the funeral, you'll have closure. To me, that is just so asinine. I cried every day for 3 or 5 years, and every time my son won medals in drumming, and I just wished so badly that my husband could be there to hear him, and he would have been so proud of him. But anyway, it takes a long time. Every time I hear a certain piece of music that we love to hear, of course, I cry, even to this day, 24 years later. And I remember when I was working, and a lady that I worked with, her husband died in Alberta, And of course, the horrible thing of having to bring his body back here to Nova Scotia. And I overheard some people talking in the office, oh, well, as soon as they have the funeral, she'll have closure. And I turned to them and I said, no, there is never any closure, just like bink. What are you supposed to do? Oh, forget about it? Get over it? No, that word closure just bothers me so much. What does your people there think about that?
Well, that's a great question. So, Simon, what's your take on people talking about that? Talking about it's almost like shutting a door. You have the funeral and then it's over with, and your grief is done, and you should be on your road to moving on.
I think that Tara has said so much that is important. One idea is that funerals are really only one part of grief, and when a funeral's over, oftentimes there's an awful lot of work to do, like trying to make meaning out of or reach acceptance from a loss. And what Tara and the previous caller, Leona, both have in common is they mention the word suddenly, and it sounds like the loss that Tara experienced was sudden and unexpected. And, well, we all experience bereavement, and it's a normal part of life. Not all losses are the same, and when you lose someone suddenly or violently or accidentally or unexpectedly, oftentimes it creates a more painful and a more prolonged course of grief.
And Roy, what are your thoughts?
I couldn't agree more with Simon, and really appreciate the example that Tara's showing of the heart's long-term. It's an attachment machine. It doesn't ever really stop doing its job. It loves to stay attached to what it loves. It loves to stay connected to what's important. And years later, what a legacy that love still bears. That it still reverberates in her heart. It's very natural. It's very good. Yeah, there is no closure. In fact, the nature of grief, I would say, is that there's always a sense of it both being unfinished, that there's aspects when the death comes that there's something that remains unfinished, and that's the pain. And then there's also a sense somehow that something is continuing, and that's our connection and love. So I would say that Tara's story shows both of those sides.
Tara, what do you find that the crying helps? Like you mentioned, like you might hear a song, or you'd cry when you.
I'm a crier. I'm a crier. I cry a lot.
Do you find that acts as a release, though?
It can go on. Yeah. Well, release, I suppose. You can't help it. It just comes. If something strikes me that reminds me of my husband, tears just come immediately, and people will say, "Oh, what's the matter? What's the matter?" And I'm going, "It's nothing. It's okay. I'm just remembering." And some people don't understand that. They think, "Oh, well, you should be over it by now. It's 15 years ago." And I go, "Yeah." So what? I still have pictures of him around the house. And anyway, it's just that word closure. I wish people would realize it's not that easy.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. You have a good one now.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We've got Jennifer Drost from Quispam-Sis, New Brunswick on the line. Good day.
Hi.
So, Jennifer, how do you cope with grief?
Well, I lost my mom. She passed away. It'll be 3 years in January. It's actually, it would have been her birthday today.
Oh, goodness.
Some strategies that I've had that have helped. It was, at first I wasn't dealing with things, and then the grief was coming out in physical ways. I would, have a twitchy eye. I was having heart palpitations, some anxiety attacks. And so some things that I've learned that have helped is talking to people. I saw a psychologist who was very helpful at being objective and seeing my emotions and letting me just talk about anything. That was super helpful. And also celebrating the good things of the stories, the memories, like the last caller talked about, some things, some moments they make you want to cry when you hear a song on the radio, but there also might be some moments where it makes you laugh, and just taking a moment and acknowledging those moments, because when you love someone so deeply, it hurts a lot when they pass. So I felt like, and just being easy on yourself and giving yourself a lot of grace during hard times. It's sometimes we expect so much of ourselves to be able just to carry that grief, when we would never expect anyone else to be able to carry that at that same level. Anyways, those are some things that were helpful for me. I also, like, as I mentioned, would have been my mom's birthday today. One thing, my sister and I and my aunt, we get together, and my aunt's two daughter-in-laws, and we just got back from St. Andrews, and we had a girls' weekend, and we celebrate and we laugh and we think of all the good things, and have memories. And this is our third time going on this trip, and it's kind of special. We do it every year around her birthday, so that was what I do.
That's awesome, Jennifer. And you mentioned one thing I want to go back to. You mentioned about, cutting yourself a break when it comes to dealing with the grief. What does that look like in terms of, is that like saying, okay, today I am upset. I need to realize that I can't, do 62 things around the house, and I just got to take a day or take some time. Can you just describe what it looks like?
Yeah, that's an awesome example. I have a very loving, supportive husband. We've been married for 14 years, and he's so great at when I'm like, this is a really hard day, and I know he knows today even that today is a hard day, but he just give me a little more time to deal with things, and maybe he steps up a little bit more, and maybe I need to journal, maybe I need to do some other things, just talk to my sister more, and just take some moments of self-care, and exercise, making sure I'm sleeping and eating well, and all those things are really important.
Well, that's great to hear. Jennifer, thank you so much for phoning in and sharing your story with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for hosting such a great show.
Have a good one now.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
You too. Simon, I wanted to come back to you. What do you think about Jennifer talking there about celebrating her mother's life and going on that trip with her family, and just retelling the stories and having a laugh and remembering the good times? Is that part of the grieving process? Is that something else? Where do you think that falls?
I'm glad you highlighted that aspect of Jennifer's call, because part of grieving is also paying attention to and strengthening existing relationships. Grief can often lead to isolation, and so when you're dealing with grief, it's important to find or to re-engage social supports and to create and to strengthen other attachment bonds, and that's what I heard Jennifer doing in that example, and I think that's a vitally important part of grieving.
And Roy, what are your thoughts on what Jennifer had to say?
Well, first of all, she should go into the counseling biz, because she's really got a lot on the go in terms of taking good care of herself, with journaling for herself and connecting with family and ritual. So she's, I would think, would be a great example of how one might move forward in their grief. But I did want to say something about her anxiety and the eye twitching and her physical experience of grief. And I think this is sometimes that we forget that there is an element of grief, a huge element of grief, perhaps the sole element of grief, which is called separation anxiety or separation distress. And just as if a child cannot find her mother, the child will become distressed and anxious and protest and eventually become quite distraught and despairing. There's a way in which it's very natural for us to have this anxiety and this distress. And as Simon said, the antidote for that is human connection, to get relational and to get our social engagement system online, which helps us to calm our nervous system, to feel connected and safe and secure and oriented. and helps us to drop down out of anxiety and that hyper vigilance and distress into a more calm and connected place. And that's kind of where we want to head in grief.
All right, we've got Diane Chalmers calling from Halifax. Good day, Diane.
Hello.
So, what about yourself? How do you cope with grief?
Well, my story started in March of 2019, just a year before COVID started. I lost my very healthy 37-year-old son, and he died very suddenly. It was a shock. It was over a period of a few hours, and it was from complications from the flu. And at the hospital, I was able to watch them in ICU while they worked very, very hard to try and save him, because he was such a healthy person. And so their efforts didn't work, but they tried so very, very hard. So the shock, the suddenness of it was unbelievable. And I don't really recall those first few months. Really, and looking back on them, I realized that I was in incredible shock then. I had a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, a lot of the things that you've already talked about. But then I fell on a course of trying to cope with it and getting myself feeling better. And it led me to the Halifax Hospice, where they offered services for people who are grieving. And I met a wonderful counselor there who gave me so much information and so much help. And she really did start me on that road to some kind of recovery, although I have to say that it is not something you ever get over. You live a different way when you've lost a child. And it doesn't matter what their age is, I don't think. So I learned a lot of my feelings were, she kept saying, that's perfectly normal, and don't worry about that, that's normal. And then gave me ideas for taking care of myself and things that I could do that would help. So I started journaling, and that really helped. I had an interest in painting before anything had ever happened to my son, so I took up painting again furiously, and that was really helping a lot. But this whole process has been, as said, a journey. It has ups and downs. It reminds me a bit of the being at the ocean and watching the waves go up and down. The grief ebbs and flows. You have days that you feel you're okay and you're doing things normally, and then there's other days where you can't even get anything done. You're back in it again. You fall down again. And that's when I use some of the tips that I've learned from the counselor and from my own reading. The things to do, whatever is going to make me feel good, I will do. And that may be something from making a cup of tea and just sitting down and reading a book that's comforting to read, or it may be doing some painting or going for a walk or connecting with one of my other children or someone in my family. So I allow myself those times. And I'm still doing that now, and I'm feeling that I'll probably be doing it for a long time.
How long, Diane, did it take you to realize that you needed to do those sorts of activities to sort of give yourself the time you needed? Like, did you come upon that yourself? Did you come across it after you talked to the counselor?
Well, what happened was I didn't realize that in the first 3 months that I was trying to just carry on as normal, just being feeling very, very sad, anxiety and fear and that, but I thought that was normal, so I was just sort of trying to do things as I normally do. And then another 3 months so 6 months went by before I realized that I needed help. And that's when I got in to see somebody at Halifax Hospice. So 6 months after his death, I started to turn the corner. And I could feel that I was turning some kind of a corner, but it wasn't any kind of way. I couldn't say that it was any kind of a way to get over something or into complete recovery. It wasn't. It was just the beginning of the journey, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. And Diane, those first 6 months that you're talking about, was it, you mentioned being in a state of shock, was that sort of like because some people that we've been talking to throughout the show today mentioned, like, when it first strikes you, it's kind of like a numbness, or they're just sort of, they're there, but they're not there, if you know what I mean. Is that the way that you felt at the beginning?
Yeah, it was an awareness that I wasn't doing and even saying things that I would normally have done. And it was only looking back on it that people would tell me things that I had said, and I said, that doesn't sound like something I would say or something I would do. I actually got myself in a little bit of trouble that way, if you know what I mean, like being inappropriate and responding to people and that. And I realized that I was in shock, so I wasn't thinking clearly.
All right. Well,
it's almost like when I look back on it, it's almost like it's like there's a sort of dream-like visualization of those first 3 months.
Yeah. All right, Diane, thank you so much for giving us a call and telling us about your story.
Okay. All right.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Simon, I wanted to jump back to you for a second before we go on to our other callers that are on the line. We will get to you in just a second. What do you think about what she had to say there with regards to the first, like she was saying, the first 6 months or so, where she's in this shock state, and she, now looking back, it's almost like a dream-like quality to it. Is that something that happens with a lot of people when they first enter, when they have a shocking death or some sort of big grief heaped upon them?
Her response is very understandable given the unexpected, sudden, and shocking loss of her son through something as common but dangerous as the flu. And one thing I wanted to highlight with Diane, because I believe it's the third time it's come up today, is that she turned to journaling and painting as a means of processing her emotions. And when it comes to grief, your emotions need motion. And so I was glad to hear that she leaned on strategies that would help her directly deal with and process some of her emotions, because when people get stuck or mired in grief, oftentimes there's emotions that they've been trying to avoid, and there really is no way to avoid your way out of grief. So credit to Diane for being active and doing something like journaling to try and deal with those emotions.
Simon, how important is it, because a few people have mentioned, as we've been talking this afternoon, about activity and actually doing things to help them cope. How important is activity to all of this?
A key intervention in psychology is what you call behavioral activation, and that's really a 25-cent phrase for going places and doing things in a planful way, even if you're in a bad mood. And so that's vital to the recovery of just about anyone with a mental health challenge or a coping challenge like grief or loss. I think, though, a really key and active ingredient in the successful treatment of grief is what you can call exposure. And when it comes to exposure, you're exposing yourself to emotions you might fear or avoid, and you can do this through telling the story of the loved one who is lost or remembering the person who is deceased. And it really looks like that type of exposure work is central to helping people overcome grief and loss, or more effectively deal with it.
All right, we've got Raymond Shepard on the line from Dartmouth right now. Good day, Raymond.
Good late afternoon.
So, Raymond, how do you cope with grief?
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank God for memories, because without them, it would be devastating to most and all of us. A number of ways that I cope with grief. There was like 6-7 people died in my family in the last several years. Siblings, father, aunt, this, that, and whatever. I came from a funeral yesterday in my home community for Mary Bell Moores, who was like an aunt, a friend, a relative, what have you. And I find it comforting when you can go back, if somebody has written certain things, and I don't mean a book, but they might have made notations here or there, and read their words. And I write, so I write about people as well, and that is refreshing as well. But family pictures and getting together and really talking about the individual and sharing memories and joint memories, if you will, or joint, I should say, memories, and so on. Those things are all so helpful, because when you look at it, there's no statute of limitations on grief. Some people think you're supposed to get over grief next week, the week after, whatever, and they generally say to you, oh, well, it's too bad, but luckily you moved on now, or whatever. Well, there's no statute of limitations on grief. It can go for years onward and so on. And I think it's very, very important to never forget the person, because you keep the person's memory alive. They leave you from this environment, if you will, but a part of them is still with you. And we have to maintain that, massage that, and keep that going. Another person that was a dear advocate to the African Nova Scotia community and a publisher, if you will, his name was Robert Duvet. We lost him a few days ago, and that hurts as well, because he was a true ally to the African Nova Scotia community. And so we grieve his passing as well, and we'll be trying to get together to celebrate his life as well in a public way. But these kinds of things is repeated over and over and over again, and we all go the way of the flesh, if you will. So therefore, it is necessary to have some coping skills in doing specific things to help you over that threshold, or to deal with it, or to come to acceptance, if you will, and plot a course. But memory and having conversations about dearly departed loved ones is paramount in my books.
All right. Well, thank you, Raymond, for giving us a call and telling us about that.
Thank you very much.
Roy, I wanted to quickly make a stop over to you there. When Raymond was talking about going through like the writings that people may have left behind, like whether they be in cards or notes that they may have left you, is that something you hear about frequently, people doing, and that helps them with their grief?
It helps some, and it can be very challenging for others, David, especially early on in grief. But also this can carry right on through. It can be difficult at first for people to actually engage memories, to engage photos, to remember the songs, to go places where they went with their loved one, or to pick up gifts that they may have received from them, or even just to sit in a kitchen where they used to sit with their husband every morning, and even the smell of coffee that's brewing in the morning. My dad gets up every day, he makes the coffee, and he gives my mom one in bed. And should one of them die, I think there would be a way in which that would be a very painful event for my father, for instance, to make coffee and not be able to bring it to her. So memories can be challenging for us, and we need to gently move and make sure we're comfortable and supported and feel like it's okay for us to go deeper. Some people, it's really important really early. Other people, it can be a little sharp.
All right, we've got Eric calling from Windsor on the line right now. Good day, Eric.
Good day. Good topic. The short version is a grief box, a grief letter. It would take probably 2 minutes to be able to share it. Shall I do that?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Tell us about it.
Okay, so it's a way to consolidate grief, especially acute grief, when the feelings, the emotions are there all the time and really begin to interfere with work or driving or anything at all. So the process is to consolidate it. It's basically an agreement between the mind and the heart of spending about 5 minutes a day to get some sense of relief for the other 23 hours. And basically, it's sort of a form of journaling. It's a bit more specific, though. You get something that reminds you of the person that's been lost, or it might be pet, as somebody has mentioned as well. And you put it in a box, a chocolate box or shoe box or something. And then for 5 minutes, so you get a clock to limit the amount of time, and you intentionally face the grief. Instead of trying to avoid it, you let it come on. So for those 5 minutes, you experience all the loss, the grief, and you write a letter to that person and say whatever is on your mind, your heart at the time. Just let it come out. At the end of the 5 minutes, just put the letter in whatever that object is. It might be a picture, a photo, a memento of some sort. You put it in a box to be able to contain it. You put the box out of the way until the same time tomorrow. And then when you may be driving along and there's a song on the radio that reminds you of that person, the tears begin to come, and say, kind of like the mind says to the heart, I get it, I'm feeling this, I will write this the next time in the grief box, but right now I'm driving. I can't have tears in my eyes and drive safely, or I've got to do this work, see these clients or customers or whatever, but I will deal with this the next time that I do the grief box. Usually after a few days, really, the intense grief, it begins to subside. You never forget the person or the pet or whatever it is, but it's just a way, again, of being able to consolidate it rather than the feelings being there all the time, that they get limited to this amount of time in the day. So that's basically it.
All right, Eric, I'm just going to throw it over to my guests to get their thoughts on this grief box. So, Simon, what are your thoughts on what Eric is saying there about having this sort of timed grief experience, I guess?
I like it on two fronts. One, when you're dealing with grief, oftentimes you're regulating your emotions, and the emotions of grief can be very powerful, and so this sounds like a tool to help someone cope with and live with those emotions. Even more so, I like that this is a tool to help somebody overcome avoidance. Rather than just stuffing down your feelings, you're going to, using this strategy, try and overcome that avoidance by actively processing and dealing with your emotions. So that has some of the key ingredients identified by psychology and research when it comes to dealing with grief. So I could imagine that strategy being effective. And
Roy, what about yourself?
I have lots of my clients write letters to their deceased loved one, and then to have their deceased loved one write a letter back to them. It's a really powerful way of both engaging in the emotions, in the challenge of the death itself, of talking about what's changed, and oftentimes just getting permission to live without the person. So those can be very powerful, very, very powerful rituals and exercises that can help.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your call today, Eric.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for doing it. Bye.
Bye-bye. And we've just got a few seconds left. Simon, any parting thoughts?
Certainly enjoyed the conversation, and I really appreciated the contribution of the callers. In fact, I often found myself moved by them, and I appreciate their innovations and ideas, and it shows you how most people are quite adaptive and resilient and will rebound on their own in the face of grief.
And Roy, about 10 seconds to say goodbye.
To all those folks who didn't get to talk today, we hope that this conversation was helpful. And a quick quote is, a human thing, love, a holy thing to love what death can touch. Thanks.
All right. Thank you all so much for my guests, Simon Sherry and Roy Ellis. Cross Country Checkup is up after the news. And switch on your TV tonight and join us at 11 o'clock for Atlantic Tonight. And we'll be back next Sunday. We'll hope to talk to you then. Have a great day.